And he came running after me and said, dude, I can't do it to you. And I said, what do you mean, Dave? And he said, while you were sleeping, I erased a bunch of words and typed fuck throughout your term paper. I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with you?
Welcome to Story and Craft. Now, here's your host, Mark Preston.
Okay, we're back. You and I together, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, thank you very much for checking out the show. Glad to have you. And just in case you hear a little bit of noise in the background and maybe a little scratching, a little fidgeting, we have a brand new golden retriever puppy. He's 10 weeks old. Ranger is his name. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know we used to have a golden retriever, a wonderful little guy named Buddy, passed away a little over a year ago, just broke my heart. But I was chatting with my kids and we kind of decided it's time to get another friend to have around the house. And of course, with them all being in college, it's nice to have somebody around. So I'm not all by myself. But man, I tell you what, I totally forgot how much energy these puppies have. Like, holy cow. Just a ton of energy. Of course, coming to you today, as always, from the beautiful beaches of South Padre Island, Texas, which right now, we've got a tropical storm going on. So it's been kind of quiet the last few minutes or so. That's why I'm recording right now. But we've had a lot of rain and crazy stuff coming in from the Gulf. But, you know, it's pretty chill overall. And there's nothing like walking a puppy in like 40-mile-an-hour winds. It's truly an experience. Now, today we have a great episode. I am so jazzed to bring this to you. James Comey, former FBI Director. You probably heard a lot about him a few years ago, back during the previous presidential administration. He's got a great personal story, and I'm happy to be able to bring that to you. If you've seen the movie The Comey Rule with Jeff Daniels, who played James Comey, it was a really great story about how he became the FBI director and the things he went through during his tenure at the FBI. You know, it's really interesting to speak with someone who's actually sat one-on-one for a dinner with the former president, as well as navigated a lot of pretty high-profile stuff, for lack of a better way of putting it. He has a new novel out, a new crime novel called Westport. It is fiction, but of course, he has a lot of experience to draw from. In fact, he drew some inspiration from his daughter for one of the characters in the book. It's great to talk about his creative works, his time working in the FBI, and just kind of what's his story. Even if you've seen the movie, The Comey Rule, there's a lot more info we cover in this episode, which was really a pleasure to bring to you. Don't forget, everything Story and Craft. Head to storyandcraftpod.com. All the socials are up there. You can find out more about our guests. Also, if you do me one little favor, I would be so appreciative. Right now, pick up your phone or whatever device you're using and follow the show. Like the episodes, follow the show, leave a review if you would. It just makes it a lot easier whenever we have a new episode for you to know, well, there's a new episode out. Also helps other people discover Story and Craft. And I appreciate you being here, and it is a real pleasure to bring you some great conversations like today. It's James Comey Day right now on Story and Craft.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
Doing well. How are you doing today?
Doing great, thank you. It's a beautiful day in Virginia. I hope it's beautiful wherever you are.
I am at the southern tip of Texas in a little island called South Padre Island, and it is hot, it is humid, and but I'm not complaining because my AC went out this weekend, and we just got it fixed. So I'm enjoying it not being 90 degrees in here right now. So,
Oh, I can bet.
and we have a 9-week-old golden retriever puppy, and he was not happy.
Oh,
He wanted to stay downstairs where we have a tile floor down here, so he can lay on it. I'm like, so it's been an ordeal. I'm like going, but wait a minute. It's Monday. It's a good Monday. So I get to chat with you and feeling good about it. But it's just past lunchtime your time. Did you already have a chance to grab some lunch?
I haven't yet. A couple of my grandchildren are outside playing with my wife, and then I told them we would have a late lunch after Pop was finished.
What's on the menu for today?
I think it's going to be grilled cheese with grapes that we cut, because we're not going to make sure their parents know we're cutting our grandchildren's grapes. And I don't know, could be Cheetos. Pop really spoils them.
Wait, how old are your grandchildren?
5 and 3.
Oh, okay. So they're still very young. Okay. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, they're still in the got to cut the grape phase.
Yeah.
Now, what's it like to now have a work of fiction out there? Is this your second fiction book? Am I correct?
It's my second. So it feels a little familiar to me. My imposter complex is still active. I think it's drifting away a little bit, but I didn't know the rhythm of fiction, nonfiction, at least the books I did, nonfiction books. I wrote them, and then a few months later they were published. But in the world of fiction, I've discovered, as you surely know, that you write books well in advance. So I'm actually in the process of finishing the book for next May. So part of the challenge of talking about Westport is my head is in the next book and actually starting to think already about what the fourth book will look like. So that's a strange sequence.
Former FBI folk are not necessarily known for their creative, the idea of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, black and white, Was it a stretch for you, or was it just a valve opening like, okay, this is something I've always wanted to do? And was there a creative itch always there to do fiction?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my answer when I was first asked about it, as I was finishing my second nonfiction book, was no, I've never wanted to do that. And I would never do that. And if I'm honest, I think I was a bit of a nonfiction snob about it because I've always read nonfiction. And I thought, well, I don't make stuff up kind of thing. And then luckily I had an editor who didn't tell me I was full of crap, but instead said, well, you ought to give it a try. Because I've always loved to write. I wrote a lot in high school and college, did a lot of journalism, and I've always thought in terms of stories. It's weird as I look back through now having my own 5 children and now grandchildren. My role in my family with 4 siblings was I was the story getter and teller. I used to come to the dinner table. We always ate together, and I would have tried to remember something from the day and then tell it in a way that entertained my siblings and my parents.
Now, where did you fall in the birth order?
I was the second child.
Now, you said there were 5 kids in your family?
4 kids.
4 kids.
Yeah. And so maybe that's a natural role for a second child, trying to find, try time in the spotlight. But I did that. And then I came to still believe that really good prosecutors, really good trial lawyers in general, are storytellers. They can take a complex set of facts and hold a jury's interest and attention and synthesize it in a good way, speak about it cleanly without distraction, which is what good writing requires, I think. And so this was part of who I was. And when they finally pushed me, just give it a try, that's when a valve opened, because I realized that I love to write. I type very quickly. I took a class in high school as a freshman to try and suck up to a sports coach. And that did not work, but I learned how to type.
I remember my old IBM Selectric I did in 8th grade. I was sick the day they learned how to key the numbers on the top row. Remember those little things of tape you'd use to do little correction on the typewriter?
Yep.
But when you've got a narrative in your mind, you got something, you can kind of get it out of your mind and on paper pretty quickly. And,
it flows out quickly. I just had a flashback, not just the erasable, the correction tape, but you could buy typing paper that you could erase with the end of a pencil eraser after you typed. And the reason I remember this is I typed a term paper in an all-nighter one time in college, and I fell asleep with it still in the typewriter. And I didn't realize that my roommate had erased a number of 4-letter words and written fuck throughout typed it throughout my paper, and ran after me to stop me from turning it in, thank God.
Well, he just did that as like a practical joke, like you would catch that?
Yeah, just he thought it was hilarious.
And you got up and you're just going to make a beeline to class, not even go, okay, I know this is ready to go, not even really reviewing it. Wow, okay. So
yeah, I'm just going to hand it in. And he came running after me and said, dude, I can't do it to you. And I said, what do you mean, Dave? And he said, while you were sleeping, I erased a bunch of words and typed fuck throughout your term paper. I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with you? But thank God he told me. We're still in touch. It wounded our friendship.
Where'd you go to school?
The College of William and Mary in Virginia.
Kind of going back a little bit more origin story. I'm kind of curious to talk about where you went to school. Where did you grow up? Are you from Virginia originally?
No, from the New York area. I lived in Yonkers, New York, which borders the Bronx, New York City on the north. And my family lived in an Irish, we weren't Irish immigrants, but a lot of Irish heritage people on a hill in a particular area of Yonkers. And then my father took a new job, moved to the wilderness across the Hudson River to northern New Jersey. But it was all the New York suburbs is where I grew up. And I went to college in Virginia, which it was my introduction to Virginia. I didn't know anything about it.
What kind of work did your father do?
He sold... my dad is gone now, but I can see him telling me we used to drive around New York, and he would say, "There's my gas station. That's my gas station," and none of them were his. He worked for Mobil, which is Exxon Mobil now, and he would find locations for new gas stations as driving was expanding in the United States in the 60s. His job was to find those spots. And so he used to claim them for the rest of his life as my gas station.
So he'd find strategic locations that would be like off the interstate at an exit. Like it's a good place to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Folks will stop there. That'd be a great place for a gas station. He started out selling cans of motor oil to unaffiliated gas stations, then graduated to being he worked most of his career in what they call corporate real estate, which makes it sound like he was a titan, that he owned real estate. He owned the house we lived in, but that was his job, to find places like that.
Now, was your mother working, or was she a stay-at-home mom with the 4 kids?
She was home with us until the last one went to college. Then she got a graduate degree in computer education because she wanted to know more about technology. And then she taught at the Girl Scouts of America for many years after we were gone, taught kids how to interact with computers and use computers and technology well, which is a pretty cool thing for a woman then it would have been in her late 60s, and she did it for another 20 years.
Was this roughly like late 70s ballpark or early 80s?
Yeah, so let's see. So my youngest brother went to college in 82, so she would have started doing it in the mid-1980s.
Yeah, that's right. When I think the computers we're using, remember the old Apple IIe, big old beige monolithic computers, that was kind of new, an idea to teach that in school,
Yeah. And she had this belief, which is, she was right, that young people, especially girls who needed to grow up understanding the technology that was going to drive America and life. And so it was a way of empowering women by starting as young girls and making sure they understood the technology in a good way. It was a very, very cool thing. My mother was a really cool person.
And a lot of ladies were pioneers in the computer. If I remember, the computer history, serves as far as the early programmers, and for going way, way, way back. In fact, I grew up in a suburb called Richardson, North Dallas, and that's actually the headquarters of Texas Instruments. So all of my friends in school, a lot of them, their parents worked at TI. So I got a chance to see computers. Computers was kind of an early, was fortunate to have an early introduction to it. Now I'd like to get away from computers as much as possible. But so did your siblings, did they kind of follow your path, or did they head into law? Did they kind of go their own way?
No, they're very diverse. My father used to joke his children had protected him against a changing economy, because my sister went into finance. She was the oldest. And then my next brother below me became an architect. And then my youngest brother became a brain surgeon. He's still a neurosurgeon. So my father used to say, I got a banker, a lawyer, an architect, and a doctor. I'm covered.
He did well, most certainly. And he had a few gas stations, and under his belt.
His gas stations, yeah.
Now, when you were starting off, was law always on the radar for you, or was it something, for lack of a better way of putting it, did you kind of happen into that as you were studying?
I was going to be a doctor. And my family, even though we were middle class, my parents preached and sort of planted in us this idea that you had to find a way to contribute and to try to help people less fortunate than we. My father used to joke his dream was to be lower upper middle class. And he said, someday I'm going to get to lower upper. But he said, we laugh, but there's a lot of people down the ladder from us, and you have to find a way to contribute, to help. And so I thought the way I can do that is through medicine. So I was a pre-med major at William & Mary. I was a chemistry major. I took advanced biochemistry, chemistry, maths of all kinds, physics, and had a crisis when I was the end of my junior year. I thought, wait a minute, why am I doing this? This is not my strength. And started casting about for other ways to be useful. And short story, I decided, well, what do I do pretty well? I write pretty well. I speak pretty well. I like to interact with people. Maybe the better thing to do is something in the law field. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Went to law school. After law school, I represented poor people in a clinic during law school. I loved that. Worked for a judge after I graduated, sat in the courtroom one day and watched a mafia case, and I was struck by lightning. I went home and called my girlfriend, now my wife, who was living in Virginia, and I said, I know what I want to do. And she said, what? I said, I want to be a federal prosecutor. I want to put the mob away. I've always hated bullies. I was bullied as a kid. And I thought, if I can put those bullies away, what a way to make a life.
Didn't you end up working in the Southern District of New York as an assistant U.S. District Attorney, correct?
Yeah, and those were the people, those assistant U.S. attorneys, those young people were the ones I was watching in that courtroom that day, trying to lock up Fat Tony Salerno, the boss of the Genovese family, crime family. And I told my wife, I not only want to do this, I want to do it in New York. And that was a much harder conversation because she didn't love the idea of New York. Well, my girlfriend then.
Where is she from originally?
She's from Iowa and then lived in Virginia when her father worked for different stints in the government in the Nixon years. So early 1970s.
That's a pretty big, to say, hey, this is something I would really like to do in this place. You always hear about the Southern District of New York as a very active, I imagine there's competition. A lot of people want to go there, and do their work there. So did William and Mary have a law school or did you go somewhere else for law school?
I went to the University of Chicago for law school, which was a great law school. And really, I was waitlisted there and thank God they took me in off the wait list. And so I went from there because of its reputation. I was able to get a job working for a judge in Manhattan, federal judge. And then a really important stroke of luck, was the judge turned out to be someone who had worked as a federal prosecutor. And so when he recommended me, because you're right, it's a hard place to get a job. Years later, I became the boss there, the U.S. attorney. And I know how hard it is to get in. That his word that they should take a chance on me was a big help.
My grandfather, rest his soul, had a pet interest in law, and so did I. But I kind of ascribed to what Tom Hanks once said. He said, something about being an attorney is like doing homework for a living, and he didn't want to do that, So I know just enough to know what I don't know, So along the path, and you're going to law school, and your wife, was there an evolving master plan, or was it just get to be in the Southern District, and that's where you're going to ride out your career, or did you already have aspirations for doing something else?
Oh, gosh, no. The master plan was that we would, I told her that I would stay 3 years in the Southern District of New York. And after 6 years, so it doubled the lie, I kept my promise to her and moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I didn't know anybody. And I wanted to be a federal prosecutor there. And I couldn't get into the government job because there was a hiring freeze. So I went to a big law firm, which was like doing homework for a living. And I left there after 3 years when the freeze lifted, and I became the supervisor at the federal prosecutor's office in Richmond. And that's what I was going to do for the rest of my career.
So you saw kind of like a path, like a narrative of how things were going to go throughout your career, how you would come up the ranks. How did you veer off that path? Did somebody come to you and go, hey, you should, whether it be FBI or whether it be private sector, how did those things come along to you?
It was one of my career is a series of unplanned lightning strikes, because I wasn't planning to move up the ranks. I was going to stay as a federal prosecutor in Richmond, which had a real problem with violent crime. It was really rewarding to try and rescue neighborhoods there that were plagued by violence. And we had a 5-bedroom house that I paid $252,000 for, and we had good public schools. We had 5 children by this point, and so that's where I was going to stay. I worked on a terrorism case where I was going to ask the grand jury to accuse Iran of funding an attack on an American Air Force barracks in Saudi Arabia, which they did. And the new administration of George W. Bush, that was a big deal that this prosecutor in Richmond wanted to do that. And so I had to go to Washington to explain myself. And I ended up all the way at the White House explaining it to the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Advisor. And then I went home to Richmond, and they gave me permission, and I brought that case, and I was working that case. And then 9/11 happened.
Now, who exactly was the defendant in that case? You said it was a known terrorist or somebody that was assumed to be a terrorist?
The defendants were a dozen or so members of Hezbollah, the Party of God, which is a Shiite terrorism organization that's in the news now because it's attacking Israel from the north a lot, from its safe harbor in Lebanon. But it is a tool of Iran. And in the 1990s, Iran was supporting Hezbollah to try and attack Americans inside Saudi Arabia. And so the individual defendants were the members of the Hezbollah team and logistics team that ran the attack. And so after 9/11, there was a political dispute in Washington, in New York, that I didn't know anything about and wasn't following, where the Republicans and the Democrats, imagine that, couldn't agree on who should be the chief federal prosecutor after 9/11 in Manhattan. And someone at a meeting said, "Hey, what about that guy from Virginia? He used to be in New York." And so I became the relationship everybody settled for. The Republicans and the Democrats all said, "Yeah, he'd be okay." And so I went back to New York with my amazing spouse. Right after 9/11, the Trade Center site was still smoking, and I became the chief federal prosecutor back there without ever having applied, without ever having thought about going back to New York. And so we went back.
You said you had to speak with the secretary. Was it Condoleezza Rice, I think?
Yeah, Condi Rice was the National Security Advisor. Donald Rumsfeld and Colin Powell were the main people. I wasn't supposed to go to this meeting. The story is actually even funnier that I'm letting on, but I was so relaxed because they told me, "You have no speaking role. You wouldn't even be in the meeting. We're going to have you drive over with the Attorney General. He'll go into the White House Situation Room and explain the case. You'll sit out in the lobby, and then you can ride back with him." And I thought, what a great field trip. So I'm sitting in the lobby outside the sit room when the door bangs open, and Colin Powell is standing there, and he says, "Who is the prosecutor?" And so I raised my hand, and he says, "Get in here." And apparently the Attorney General I don't know what was going on. It wasn't good. So they brought me in, sat me at this little table and threw questions at me. And I'm sure you've had these kind of experiences. I didn't have time to get nervous because I wasn't going to get in the game. I still had my warm-ups on. This is going to be fine. And all of a sudden I'm standing in the middle of the court. And so it was amazing. And I sweat through my suit and then I left. And I think that I've been told since then, that's how. They probably remember my height most of all, honestly, because I had to duck in the White House Situation Room to walk under doorways. But someone said, "What about that tall guy from Virginia? Could we use him in New York?"
How did the case come to you again? And how did you, for being in Richmond, that's kind of how'd that come on your radar, for lack of a better way of putting it?
Great question. Because the then FBI director, a guy named Louis Freeh, was frustrated with the pace of the investigation in the office that had originally been assigned the case, which was Washington, D.C. And he knew me because he had actually been, this is all circle, he had been the head of the hiring committee when I applied as a young lawyer to join the Southern District of New York. And so he remembered me from there, called me out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, if I could get a terrorism case moved to you in Richmond, would you do it?" And I said, "Of course I'll do it." And so then he set to work on the head of the Justice Department, who was a guy named Robert Mueller, who was acting as the Attorney General. And he asked Mueller to order the case moved to me in Virginia. And Mueller did it. And that's how I ended up with the case in Virginia.
Did you feel any, I don't want to say intimidation, but did you feel that your job was going to be any harder? Or is it just you had more of an audience than you're used to, let's say?
Probably a little of both, actually, at different moments, because I felt pressure because the leaders of the Justice Department had sort of put me in this game, and I felt pressure to deliver. And it was a hard case, and I won't go into all the details, but it was hard to put together. And I think that explained why it had taken so long in DC. I felt a special sense of pressure because the families of the 19 American service members who were killed that day were very frustrated that a case hadn't been brought, and it had been almost 5 years at that point. And so I felt that pressure. But sitting in Richmond, you can't see Washington from Richmond. That's one of the things I loved about it. And so it would feel like I was just doing the regular job. And so that's what I mean by saying different days I would feel differently, I think.
I remember in the Comey Rule, which I don't know how many people have the good fortune to say that Jeff Daniels has played them before. That's kind of cool. But there was one scene that you were talking about, the impetus for what you're wanting to do coming from a childhood experience. How accurate was that? Because of course it's movies, creative license, but how accurate was that in terms of, your motivations in the jobs you took and the things that you were wanting to accomplish?
I think the writers of that movie and Jeff Daniels, who's incredible, of course there was license taken with actual conversations, but I think they captured that in an accurate way. They captured the spirit of my family in an eerily accurate way, and the nature of my interactions and the quality of the people that I worked with. The one thing they missed was I think I'm pretty funny, and Jeff Daniels' character, there's no humor in that, and so that was a major miss.
One of the scenes when they open up your closet and there's not a lot of difference in the shade of the sport coats. I think it was kind of, this is who we're dealing with now.
Yes, exactly.
You talk about your background, and you're talking about where you came from, your motivations. What is there anything in particular that was really driving you the whole time? Was there things you were wanting to accomplish that you were starting to see pathways, the FBI or anything else? How much of that was informed by your upbringing? And again, I'm kind of alluding to what Jeff Daniels talking about. What was it? There was a break-in at your home.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
I don't know. So I was a senior in high school. Actually, it was the last time I wrote fiction before this. I was working on a piece for a literary magazine, believe it or not, when a gunman kicked in the front door of my parents' house in northern New Jersey, and then in a terrifying night held me and my brother captive, and we escaped, and he caught us. We escaped again. And so I at least, again, we're all unreliable narrators about our own lives, especially, but I don't believe that, at least it didn't explicitly drive me into law enforcement. But the impact it had on me was I became a life is short person, because that night I knew I was going to die. It's even beyond I thought I was going to die. I really was convinced at one point the guy was about to kill me. And it made me, my kids are on this podcast, they would laugh and groan. It made me a sunsets person. I will stop the car and show them a sunset. And so they now text me pictures of sunsets. But that sense that life is really short has been a North Star for me, because it made me figure out what matters to me. I really don't care about having been in prominent jobs. I know who I want to have been when I die. And it's not, who knows what'll be in my obit? I guess I could guess, but I want to have been a great husband, father, grandfather, and community member. And the rest is all great. But that organizing principle, I think, was probably my parents made it part of me growing up. But
yeah, because you're saying how your father, be of service, and that it seemed like it was sort of like, the ingredients were there, that just kind of baked it in. That moment maybe.
Yeah. And so when weird things, like I never applied to be FBI director. I didn't expect to be FBI director. I said no when they called me in Connecticut and asked me to come down and be interviewed for the job. And then my wife talked me into saying yes. And so part of it is, and I lost that job. I got fired in 2017, but the jobs were never part of my identity. And so I really enjoyed them. And I felt like I did a good job. I tried to do a good job in very difficult circumstances. But losing it is, people often ask me, wow, that must have been traumatic. Not really, not for me personally, because what matters to me is what's running around outside while you and I are talking, my grandchildren playing on a swing set with my wife. And so I think that was part of me, but that became part of my consciousness that night, lying on the bed with a gunman pointing a gun at the back of my head in silence for many, many seconds, because he hadn't expected me to be there. He was a serial rapist and robber who was coming for my sister. And so thank God she wasn't home.
Do you know if he had been casing the house? Did he know
been.
what he was going? Okay, I got you.
Yeah, he had been. They found his footprints outside a window to our basement, and he likely mistook my brother lying in the dark watching television for my sister. And so that was his MO. He preyed on babysitters. And so he likely saw my parents go out, looked in, watched, and then kicked in the front door. And it's even more terrifying. I didn't know this as this was going on, but he had cut the phone lines to the homes on either side of ours, so that if we escaped, we ended up escaping at one point or running back into our own house, which was the one thing he couldn't have happened, because that was the place where there was a phone line. And we didn't know that, but we locked the door and got butcher knives and called. They didn't have 911 then. I pressed 0, and they got connected to the police department. And And so, um, but that so that night has, believe it or not, what am I now? 63, has stayed with me in a really clear way for my entire life.
Isn't that funny though? When you look back at life, how I can look back at my childhood. Some things are just like palpable; you almost touch it, and then other things like, what did I have for lunch yesterday? I got no clue. Yeah, so some things that just get kind of trapped in amber.
Yep. Well, I used to tell juries when someone would argue about a witness who didn't remember something, I would tell juries, you all know this, but time has nothing to do with memory. It's the significance of an event, right? That if I asked you the weather on the day of your wedding, you would tell me. If I asked you the weather day before yesterday, you would stop and say, wait a minute, did it rain? And so it's not about time. It's about what it means to you.
One of the things I really enjoyed about the movie, that I thought it was a good part of the narrative, and I just feel like that there was a center, the fulcrum of everything happening in life was happening at home with your wife. It was really family centric. So your wife, it seems like, and what's her name, by the way?
Patrice.
Patrice. Like I said, I'm just going off the creative license of the movie, but it seems like no decisions were being made just unilaterally. It seems like it was really kind of what was best for the family. And when everything was going on with the past administration and your daughters, how it was affecting them and them going to school. Probably now more than ever, people feel licensed to be less than diplomatic with the families of people who are doing a very difficult job. But is that an accurate assessment, kind of how you started making decisions or where your decisions came from, professionally?
Yes. I mean, my family is the center of my life, and my partnership with my wife is at the heart of that. And there were lots of times in my government career where I couldn't I couldn't share information with her.
And that had to be so difficult. That way, it wasn't. I mean, not being able to come home from work, and I've had friends in the military who are career officers who have a security clearance, and they can't come home and talk about their day at work, and that just so where you can't really share it. What is that like for you?
It's an obstacle, and it's a cloud over a relationship, but then you get used to it because, right, we both knew I can share with you how I'm feeling about something. It's very frustrating, or I'm angry, or I'm concerned. I just can't tell you the particulars because you don't have a clearance. And so you really get used to it. But I'll tell you what, that movie, The Comey Rule, you don't have to have met my wife if you've seen the movie, because the British American actor Jennifer Ely is my wife. I was freaked out when I saw that movie because she looks like her, she moves like her, she talks like her, she has her clothes, I mean, down to every detail.
Now, did she talk to your wife though? Did they have a sit down?
On the phone. They had never met. And so I was struck by that. And the other thing that movie does, that I actually had a very emotional reaction to seeing it the first time. I started crying because it showed me something that I'm ashamed to admit I missed. And that is the pain my family was feeling from the shots that were being taken at me. That because when you love someone, it's, in a way, it's easier to be the someone, because you can put on a hard shell and say, screw these people. I know I'm doing the right thing. But when the ricochets, when a family member is watching that all around you, it causes them a tremendous pain that I did not fully appreciate. And so I remember that hitting me like a wave.
Yeah, and I think there's one scene your daughter said she can't even go to school because people would be saying things, and people are only half educated on what's really going on when you know the full story. And that's one question I had for you with, again, I'll go back to your closet that they showed in the movie, all the same color suits, the attorneys, I know, again, career military officers, there are procedures, there's protocols, especially when you work for, in government. And I feel like it articulated very well the story of what it was like. Everybody talked about the emails and Hillary's emails. Well, people could say that, but when you kind of dive in a little bit deeper, well, there's certain protocols you have to follow. And I think we're kind of living in an era now. And I wonder, as an attorney, as somebody who's worked in government, do you feel the difference of people think that law is a lot more malleable now, as opposed to, okay, we got to do this thing. This is, if we don't do this, then we'll be hanging ourselves up and putting ourselves in a bad situation. Do you think that's something that kind of got missed? Hopefully I'm articulating my question well, but where people kind of miss the idea, well, you had to do certain things or else you would be negligent in executing the things you've got to do. And that's where I think that unfairly people, I guess they needed a boogeyman, for lack of a better way of putting it. But do you think we are in an era now where law is a little bit malleable?
Yeah, I hope not. And I actually think one of the shining lights in recent history in America at a time of turbulence and division has been our legal system. That judges, no matter their background, Republicans, Democrats, neither, state, local, federal, have shown people that this is how it works, right? That we have a system, and it's a system that's imperfect, but it's a system that's just because it's regularized, that no matter who you are, you have a certain set of rights, but you don't have privileges that come with being a special kind of person. And so bring us the facts that our legal system is devised to find truth through the collision of viewpoints, and heaven help you if you testify as a witness or you speak as a lawyer and you don't speak the truth. You will be held severely accountable for that. That's a very cool thing. And that's not a political thing. That is a foundational thing.
You really look at what's Trump and the guilty and people's is a sham and all that. And it's like, wait a minute. I've sat on a jury before. It's you sit down with other people. There is a process, and the process work. You may not like the outcome, but it seemed to have worked. And that's the thing that what you just said, that's if you're feeling like you're in a dark spot about everything else going on, at least that's still, for right now, still kind of a bright spot.
Yeah, and look at what our legal culture, and I say it that way because it's broader than just judges. It's jurors, it's bar associations, it's individual attorneys. Look at how they conducted themselves in the face of a torrent of lies about the 2020 election. There were 60 or more lawsuits at all different levels. They were all thrown out because the facts weren't there. You can say whatever you want at a press conference at Four Seasons Total Landscaping. But when you come into a courtroom and you raise your right hand or you stand up as a lawyer, make a representation, I meant it. Heaven help you if you are saying things that are knowingly false.
It may have been Bill Maher. I think it was last week's show. They played what, let's say, Rudy Giuliani had been saying for a long time. Then they played what he said in court. And then, of course, it's none of this fanciful storytelling. It is black and white as things seem to be, and as rather boring as they seem to be. At least you're kind of, there's a process for getting to the truth. And that's the one thing that it's not even a political thing. We're living in an era that for somebody like yourself, it's got to be a little bit maddening when you're going, and again, I go back to the movie, is going back and forth between this is what's going on and being manipulated into trying to make it something else. And as I was watching it a little while back, I was like, if I have a chance to speak with him, I need to ask, was it really just a one-on-one dinner with you and Trump? Did that actually happen?
Yes. And they seem to have drawn the dialogue precisely from a memo that I wrote afterwards about what had happened at the dinner. And so that is, the only thing different is I noticed they have us at a tiny little table, which is true, but he was sitting on the opposite side from me than the way they have it in the movie. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. And I expected a group dinner because presidents don't meet socially one-on-one with FBI directors. We haven't wanted that since Watergate, since J. Edgar Hoover. And so the idea that we'd be meeting alone didn't enter my mind. I thought it would be all the other heads of the intelligence community agencies, and it turned out it was just the two of us sitting at this table.
I would have gotten, not chills. I would have had a very sinking feeling knowing that this is the direction we're going, and what is this going to mean, not just for your job, but for the rule of law. I was sitting there going, thank God that's not my job. Because to see your name in the newspaper and have it, you're seeing all these different narratives out there depending on what's on the news. To go to the end of the movie, there was a quote that I think that when you were let go. And Jeff Daniels has said, there was so much I wanted to do. What was on your agenda, if you will, maybe the checklist or some bullet points that you didn't get to that you felt that you could have brought something to the FBI had you been able to stay in place a little bit longer?
I was excited about having a 10-year term because there's nothing that long in the government. And I thought the way the FBI could get better is by me spending 10 years focusing every single day on trying to improve its leadership and trying to attract to the organization a broader swath of people. 80 some percent of our special agents were non-Hispanic, Caucasian, white, and 80% of them were male. There's nothing wrong with being a white male. I am one. But as the country becomes more complicated, in my view, more wonderful, but no matter what you think, it's more complicated. We as an FBI, to be effective, have to attract a broader array of people to the organization. And so that was my mission. Those are closely related missions. And I was making progress because it wasn't about standards. We didn't need to change our standards because the talent was out there. They just didn't know that they should take a cut in pay and absorb enormous stress and come work for the FBI. But ironically, the day I was fired, I was in Los Angeles to meet that evening with 750 engineers, MBAs and lawyers under the age of 37, which was our cutoff, who were underrepresented groups, mostly Latino and Black men and women. And I was going to walk out of that evening with half of them applying to be FBI special agents. And I knew that because I had done it in Houston. I had done it in DC.
There are cultural things that they're going to be able to dial into. And that becomes an asset for an agent, I'm assuming, when they get into a community. Yeah.
Yes. And to make the institution more effective, I used to say to the people would ask inside the organization, is this some sort of diversity virtue signaling? And I would say, look, I'm not even sure what you mean by that. But this about effectiveness. If we are going to be effective in America, everybody can't look like me because we will be less effective at walking up the doorways and convincing people to trust us in front of juries, all the things we do every day. And so that was my mission at the FBI. And my great regret is I only got 4 years to do it. Now, I've heard from a lot of agents that we got momentum going, and so it has continued. But and this is the part of the FBI no one knew anything about outside, but it was the most important thing I was doing, was trying to transform it.
I was curious for Andrew McCabe as he came in, because he just saw you essentially in a buzzsaw. What was the general tone when you were kind of handing the keys off to him? And just, was it just a sense of like things are changing, or we got to keep this ship afloat, or just generally, what was that transition point like?
It was a much more fraught moment because it was a crisis in at least a couple of respects. First of all, I was fired. The president fired me on TV, and I found out about it from the news, and I was in Los Angeles. And so immediately Andy became acting director. So there was no transition. I was 3,000 miles away and no longer in the government. So actually the first decision he needed to make was, could I fly home on the FBI plane? And
So that part of the story was actually happened. And then, okay. So it seems like that'd be the noble and thing to do is you got to get home. You have a support staff.
Well, as he said, also, we're responsible for protecting this human being's life. We've got all these agents protecting him. We can't leave him in Los Angeles and drive away. And so that very much upset the then President Trump, who demanded an investigation from Andy in a phone call. And Andy said, look, I can investigate it, but I know the answer. I authorized it. We're responsible for getting the man home.
God, that's going to be... Well, you got a guy sucking all the air out of the room. It's like, listen, we got a job to do. It's you kind of feel like you're playing whack-a-mole with all these things. It's like I can't even imagine. I would be taking antacids nonstop.
I'm sure he did, but I'll tell you, one of the cool things about the Bureau, its culture, is that as things get hairier, people speak more slowly and more quietly. And there's an expression in the Bureau, when the shit is hitting the fan, and people come in to tell you that, you say, as the leader, and I'll say it in exactly the voice I would use, say more.
Mm-hmm.
And you say it in that way, and I picked this up from the other leaders of the FBI, and I copied them, because it takes the temperature down. It sends a message like, okay, we're going to be okay. Okay, you're coming in to tell me the building's on fire. Say more. What floors? And what are we doing about it? And so I'm guessing I wasn't party to any of the conversations after I was fired because I was completely cut off. But I'll bet there were a lot of calm, quiet conversations that underneath was the stomach boiling that would need antacids.
Yeah. Well, I think that's even in the military is the same kind of concept. In fact, I heard Clint Eastwood, I'm going to mangle this up. I'm paraphrasing, is like basically when everything is just hitting the fan, maybe from the perspective of a movie director, become the calmest person in the room. And sometimes it's very hard to do, it is, especially you've got 5 children. So I'm sure sometimes like be the calmest person has been a challenge, but here you've got this whole life experience. How much are you pulling from this when you write like Westport and you're coming up with ideas for other, are there just things like, oh, I remember this case and that just creates a whole story for you? Do you feel like you've got a very deep well to pull from right now?
Yes, I hope so. I mean, that's what I plan to do, is take real life experience and obviously make it fiction by changing people and situations, but have it be real. I'd like this to be some of the realest crime fiction people have seen. And a lot of times I haven't read a ton of crime fiction, but I know a lot of successful books involve prosecutors or agents who go rogue in some way. And that's a vehicle for making it exciting. And that's cool. But I think I've seen enough that's really exciting without anybody going rogue. And so I think there's stories still to be told. And eventually I will bring the readers out of the New York metropolitan area to DC and take them to the White House and the CIA and the FBI and those places. It has felt a little too icky for me, so I haven't gotten there yet. But yes, real life stories.
Where are you writing? Are you at home? You got your own office space, or does your wife boot you out of the house and say, go to a lake house, go somewhere with your laptop? And where is your preferred venue for kind of, practicing that thing you learned, that typing skill you learned in high school?
I like to sit in a rocking chair on my back porch. I have a screened-in porch, and I have a heater out there so I can try and do it as much year-round as possible. I like to sit there in the rocking chair with my laptop. Something about that place, because I have some trees in my backyard, I can look up while I'm trying to formulate a thought, stare at the trees, then look back down. And so if weather permits, and sometimes it gets cold in Virginia, I will do it there.
Now, is there coffee involved? Is there a glass of wine? I mean, what's the setup for you?
Yeah, I can't do wine. I love wine, but something about it mellows me. Maybe that takes the edge off that I need a little bit. But I will. It depends on what time of day. I drink coffee in the morning and probably a Diet Pepsi in the afternoon, and so I'll be sitting there. There's a little circular table next to me, size of a dinner plate. It's like I don't know what you call it, a cocktail type table. It's not a cocktail table, but I'll put it there. I'll sit. I'll steal a cushion from one of the other chairs on the deck, put it on my lap. It's better for me, my wrists, to keep at that angle, and put the laptop on top of that and start typing. And I don't have a schedule the way a lot of writers do, I gather. I go until I don't have any gas.
I think it's a great way to do it. I always like to write. I can always trim stuff out.
Yep. And some days that's 6 or 8 hours. Some days I try and work on it for an hour or two. I'm like, just don't have it. And then it comes back.
Do you have any desire to do any screenplays, or to even kind of try that out? And as you're looking at the book, let's say if you want to take Westport, you wanted if you spoke to a producer, maybe they wanted to turn it into a film or a TV series. Do you have any desire to kind of play with screenplays, or do you just like to kind of create the story and then say, hey, here's the book, you want to create a story, go for it?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. I mentioned my imposter complex. I'm intimidated enough by what I'm doing now. I don't love the idea of trying to get into screenplays because I have no idea how I would do that. I saw a little of that when I read the script that Billy Ray wrote and he also directed for the Comey Rule.
Oh, he's a great writer. Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, with economy of words, he can create a scene. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do in a novel, but it just seems very different in that world.
But one last question about the film, and I want to get to what I call my 7 questions as we kind of wrap up here. But on the sit down with Jeff Daniels, for me, it'd be very intimidating. Here's somebody who's going to be playing me, and I'm like, they got to be kind of like intimidated because they're meeting the person they're playing and they want to get it right. So was it a comfortable kind of sit down? How many times roughly did y'all have a chance to connect before he was like, all right, I got this?
Never before. I mean, I met him one time they invited me to come to Toronto to watch the filming. And I happened to go, took one of my kids, and we went there. And I didn't see him until they were filming the dinner scene, the scene where I was having dinner alone with President Trump. And Brendan Gleeson and Jeff Daniels did that scene. And it was one of the coolest things I've ever watched because they stayed away from each other. They didn't rehearse. They came in together, they sat down, and they did a scene that goes on for 15 minutes in a single camera, a single take. And they didn't practice because they wanted to maintain the distance that I was feeling and the tension I was feeling. And then Billy Ray was doing something that I know nothing about, but that he was dropping the lighting so slowly that you don't recognize that the beginning of the scene, the room is brightly lit. The end of the scene, all the lights are off except right over the table. But you miss it unless you look for it. But we had never met. I mean, so I didn't answer your question. We met there on the set, and he and Gleason asked me how they were doing. And I said, the highest compliment I can pay you, you've just ruined my day because you took me back to this moment and I feel it so real. And then I said to Jeff, and by the way, could you act a little taller?
How tall are you? Are you 6'6"?
I'm 6'8".
6'8". Okay. That's what.
Yeah. And he said, are you kidding me? I have 2-inch lifts in my shoes. This is Hollywood. I'm a giant.
Before we get going, I have something real quick I like to do called my 7 questions. I always talk food at least once during my show because I always do this around my lunchtime and haven't had anything to eat yet. But I was curious, what is your favorite comfort food?
I love these pretzel splits. So they're like the bow tie pretzel, extra dark, that my wife has found first. My other comfort food, which I will have in the morning, is my wife is a really talented baker. She bakes blueberry muffins, which she made this morning for my grandchildren. So I can actually still smell them in the house. Those 2 things would come to my mind.
I'm not a big baker, but I do love the way a house smells when somebody's been baking, But now, if you were to sit down, next question, with 3 people, you're going to talk story over coffee, a few hours, living or not, who would those 3 people be that you would love to sit down and share a conversation with?
I would love to talk to Reinhold Niebuhr, who was a philosopher and theologian who had a big impact on me. He was a prominent thinker in the way, especially around World War II, with helping people reconcile the problem of evil in the world. And so I think I'd find that very interesting. That's a really good question. I think I would enjoy a conversation with Barack Obama because you're right. He interviewed me, had me come back for an hour to talk to him. And that was the last time we talked personally. And I really enjoyed those conversations with him. And then who would be a third one? I probably would be, so you said living or dead. I'd love to go back and talk to one of my grandfathers in particular, who I'm told I'm like. I'd love to get his perspective on his life and his family and know him in a way I couldn't because he died when I was a freshman in college. Those are the 3 that pop into my head.
No, I'm the same way. Depending on the day, the people at the table would change a little bit. But grandfather would be there because I don't know if you're the same, but do you ever have like a split? For me, it's split second, maybe 1/10 of 100th of a second. I'll experience something with one of my kids. I want to pick up the phone and call and say, "What do you think about this or business or this, that, together?" And it's just momentary. It's been 20 years since he's passed, but or things about family that you just don't know at a young age to ask. That's the thing I think would be great to have a grandfather around for. Now, next question, going back, young guy, who was your first celebrity crush?
David Cassidy, believe it or not. I grew up as a straight kid, but I found David Cassidy, the 60s into early 70s singer, so cool that I had his posters on my wall. And so I think I would it was a boy crush on this cool young singer.
Yeah, there are those guys out there that are just like, all the girls love him. It's like, what is this thing that they've got that no matter, like I think modern, like Brad Pitt's got that going on now. Like, it's like he's got that X factor,
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't want to see Cassidy in his bathing suit. I wanted to see Farrah Fawcett. I got one of her posters later, so that
well,
was
of course, you grow up back the 70s. Of course, you had Farrah Fawcett's poster. I mean,
Yeah.
you wouldn't have been a kid back in the
this
day.
is America.
Exactly. Now, next question. And if you're going to, you and your wife are going to go to an exotic island, it's somewhere you want to be. You're not stranded there, but they don't have internet. You're going to be there for a year. And you can bring one album, a little CD, and you can bring one movie on DVD. What would the album and what would the movie be that you would bring with you?
Now, does she have to agree? Does it have to-
Well, that's the diplomacy you and your wife will have to hash
Yeah.
out. But no, I mean, it's something that you could actually go an entire year checking back in with this movie and this album.
I would bring Taylor Swift's album Folklore, which I'm a huge fan of. And I think she likes it enough that she'd be okay with me playing that all the time. In terms of a movie, I would, if she were here, she'd be laughing. It would definitely be one of the Jason Bourne flicks because actually it might be Shawshank Redemption because she often points out that I will watch that no matter what part I happen to join it while channel surfing. And I was like, of course. I mean, come on. So I think I think I would take Shawshank.
Really? Okay. So yeah, in fact, it's funny you say because last week I spoke with William Sadler, who's in Shawshank Redemption, but that's one of I think the great stories. Now, if the last couple questions here, if you were to define from the time you get up to the time you head to bed, the component parts of a perfect day for you, what would that be?
Coffee with my wife, hopefully a muffin, and then yoga with my wife. We do it just about every day. And then, or if I can't do yoga, it's because my children and their children have come over and I'm going to cook hamburgers and hot dogs for them on the grill. And then we have a dinner that my wife makes. She's a much better cook, probably one of her pastas or a salmon dish. And then put the kids to bed. And then I sit around with my children and their partners and play Time's Up or some other game like charades while finishing off some awesome wine that went with the dinner. And that's about a perfect day in my life.
Now, do your kids live near you?
4 of my 5 live near me. My oldest is a federal prosecutor in Manhattan.
Oh, really? Okay.
I don't know what she's thinking. Who's actually she's the inspiration for my character Nora Carlton, my protagonist, but she and her husband and their one, soon to be 2 kids live in that area.
You're going to have a team of grandchildren here soon. So your house is kind of the gathering point, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, if you weren't doing this, if your path in life didn't bring you here where you had a chance to work as an attorney, work in government, what other vocation would you find yourself in? Would it be the physician or would it be something else?
I think I would have, easy to say, inevitably figured out that the world of science and analytic work was not me. And so I think I might have been a journalist or a teacher, or maybe both.
And I didn't know your daughter was an inspiration for this. That's very cool. The last question I got for you: if you were to jump in the proverbial DeLorean, travel back in time to 16-year-old you're going to have a conversation for a few minutes. What would be the piece of advice you would offer yourself, either to make that moment a little bit better, or to put yourself on a path, a little bit different path? About what would the advice be you would offer 16-year-old you?
I think I would tell me. So let's say it's before that terrifying night. I think I would tell me, it's gonna be okay. Don't worry about plans. Worry about the kind of person you will be. And the reason I put it before that terrifying night is I got a big piece of that from that terrifying night. But my advice, and it's been my advice to my kids, which is, look, the only thing you need to know is who you want to have been at the end of your life. What is the sentence that will describe the life you lived? Because if you keep that as your frame of reference. The things that get in the way, houses, cars, money, human honor, all of that is blown away. And what's illuminated is what matters to you. And so just focus on that, and the rest, you'll be okay. There'll be all kinds of swerving and pain and loss and joy and happenstance, and know who you want to have been at the end.
On that note, what would that sentence be for you, do you think? If you were to say, okay, here's the, not to sound morbid, but the epitaph, what is the thing that you would like to, leave as being, this was the mark I made?
He was a great father, husband, grandfather, God willing, maybe great-grandfather. And he was useful to people who needed him.
Very good. Very good. Well, I'll tell you what, James, thank you so much for, or is it Jim? What do you like to be called, James or Jim?
Well, all my friends and family know me as Jim, but the publisher of my first book insisted it be James because I gave no interviews the year after I was fired, and everybody came to know me as James because that's what was on the news. So, but I go by Jim.
I appreciate more than you taking some time out. I know with a family outside. Hopefully tonight you can make up some hamburgers and hot dogs. A summer vacation after all. But have yourself a wonderful week. Go give those grandkids a hug, and hopefully we'll have a chance to catch up down the line.
Yeah, I'd love to. It was a great conversation. Thank you, Mark, and I hope the AC holds out.
Your mouth to God's ears. Well, there you go, James Comey. A great conversation. I really enjoyed this one. It's always cool to have someone sit down with me, and I learned things I had no clue about. Not just about them, but of course, the things they were involved in. Of course, he was a very pivotal character politically. Going back a few years ago, great story. I really enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. Once again, James Comey's new novel is called Westport. Check it out right now. It is a great read. Hey, do me a favor if you would. You got your phone or your little device sitting there. If you could just follow the show, follow Story and Craft. That way you get notified every time we have a new episode. And if you want to learn anything about the show, anything about our past guests, pretty much everything Story and Craft, head to storyandcraftpod.com. Once again, storyandcraftpod.com. You can also shoot me a message, check in, say howdy. Now, I'm going to get on out of here. I've got this rambunctious 10-week-old golden retriever puppy, the Ranger. He needs my attention, and I'm going to take him for a little stroll in this tropical storm wind fun we have going on South Padre Island. Yeah, so that's going on. Not a lot of sleep going on here at the Preston household. But hey, do me a favor, have a great rest of your week or weekend or whatever you're doing. I do appreciate you being here more than you know. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time, right here on Story and Craft.
That's it for this episode of Story and Craft. Join Mark next week for more conversation, right here on Story and Craft. Story and Craft is a presentation of Mark Preston Productions, LLC. Executive producer is Mark Preston. Associate producer is Zachary Holden. Please rate and review Story and Craft on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can subscribe to show updates and stay in the know. Just head to storyandcraftpod.com and sign up for the newsletter. I'm Emma Dillon. See you next time, and remember, keep telling your story.
Come on.